So hello and welcome. I want to start by noting that we're gathered here, some of us on and all of us utilizing resources extracted from traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, caretakers of this land since time immemorial. I hope that in addition to acknowledging this fact and how we benefit from this ongoing colonial displacement, this series of speakers and workshops will help move us towards concrete action towards reconciliation. By learning about and exploring how power and privilege are implicated in our professional values and practices even. Given my positionality as a cisgendered man, as a person of East Asian heritage who's often treated as white, as a disabled person, but also as a person with the privilege of relative employment security, given my positionality, I try to understand my work as contributing to a greater social good. But if that social good doesn't include or address those people who are pushed to the margins of our society, then who really is the social in that social good? I don't want my work, and I hope nobody here wants their work, to be remembered as the intellectual wing of settler colonialism, of white supremacy, of heteropatriarchy. So I hope this ADE for Games Community series of speakers and workshops funded by a SSHRC grants and generously supported by the Games Institute and led by myself and Dr. Daniel Harley. And this lecture in particular can help us to become more reflexive about our relationship with our fellow researchers. And today I'm very pleased to introduce our events, A.M. Darke's lecture on Black virtualities. A.M. Darke is an artist experimenting with media in forms of games, performance, software, and social practice, an associate professor of digital arts and new media, as well as performance play and design at UC Santa Cruz. Darke also directs the open source Afro Hair Library, a free 3D resource of Black hair textures and styles. Darke's practice is informed by her expansive identities and interests, particularly as a neurodivergent, gender chaotic Black woman in search of collective freedom and healing. His game, Yay or Nay, is both an amazing dig at the roller coaster of identity and politics spanning Kanye's West career, and a tongue-in-cheek exploration of Black masculinities in popular culture in a world dominated by white supremacy and organized by white masculinities. His 2021 creation, Fairly Intelligent, is both a game and interactive art that not only helped me to realize that I like specific dogs but dislike the general idea of dogs, but also is a hilarious and poignant critique of the crypto-fascism of algorithmic governance. Her work has been shown internationally and featured in publications such as Vice, the New York Times, and NPR. Thank you for joining us, AM. I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you. I am so excited to be here. Hello, everyone out in cyberspace. I am in Oakland, California, and I'm here in the house with my cat, who hopefully won't make too much of an appearance. Okay, so here we go. Black virtuality. So I love starting with this slide because every single time I do a talk, I'm like, but I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it like this. And I come up with 11 different ways of engaging, which guess what is not so great for my anxiety. So what I'd like to ask, I'd like to make a request. I'd like you to meet my Black virtuality with your own. So I am a Black person and I'm meeting you virtual in virtual space. But virtual has all of these definitions, which we'll get into. And so I wonder if I could ask that people, as to the extent that you can, become virtually Black in this space. And this isn't about, you know, whether you're a Black person or not Black person. I mean, like, what does it mean to be like situated in Blackness? And I say that because I think for me, it just makes me feel comfortable. When I'm in a Black space, a Black centered space, it's like, oh, I don't have to be like the rigid academic. I can actually just be with and among people. So I hope you'll meet me there, because that's kind of what this work is about, or trying to be about. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I hate introducing myself, so we can just skip over this, but I do love sharing really cute pictures of Pepper because she is a wonderful research assistant. So let's start with definitions. Black virtuality, what is this thing? And I'm asking because I'm trying to figure it out myself. As an artist, I've been making work around Black culture, around my own personal experience. And I really sort of moved from personal experience to thinking more in terms of community. Like, how do I make work that doesn't just sort of speak my individual experience, often in a sort of more privileged space, a space of whiteness, a space that I'm not always seeing other Black folks and seeing other kinds of Black art and expression. So how do I move from sort of that to thinking more across the diaspora, thinking more in terms of making and building with people and thinking about all of our stories? So yeah, to start with defining Black virtuality, I want to define Black and I want to define the virtual. And here I really love going with dictionary definitions because I find them really fun. My preference are the Cambridge definitions, and that's what we're using, the Cambridge Dictionary. So virtual, right? Created by or accessed through software, appearing to exist but not formally existing, and almost a particular thing. I love that, almost. And then here are some dictionary definitions of Black, and these are in order of my preference for them. So Black, without hope, very bad or sad, right? Black as a verb, right? To blacken something, to make something black. Without any milk or cream added, and I really love this one because I think about my approach to software and I think about my approach to platforms. I have in a previous talk described Mark Zuckerberg as the human embodiment of milk. So if you take that concept, right, something like Facebook or Twitter with these men who are the human embodiments of milk, what would it look like to have software that didn't have any milk or cream added? And then of course, of or belonging to a group of people, right? So I want to talk about how Black came to be, right? And here I'm not even talking about virtual space. So I'm situated in the United States. I'm a Black American. And so much of my experience and my worldview is informed by this term Black, right? To be really simple, because there's a whole other series of talks, entire disciplines dedicated to this, Blackness was invented by white Europeans for the simple purpose to justify trading human beings as commodities. It's really that simple. So Black was a term that was invented and then imposed upon a people, right? And I think about that, like in my corporeal physical form, my people were not always Black, we were blackened. And I want to think about, let's think about Black actuality as defined by whiteness. Here I'm using this photo of Viola Davis, taken by Annie Leibovitz, the famous photographer for Vanity Fair. And there's so many images that I could share of Blackness, but I wanted to share just the single image because I look at this and I think it's giving slavery. Like this isn't even one of the worst images of Blackness that we can imagine. And I don't have to tell you what those are. Anti-Blackness is something that we export globally from the United States. So I feel like if I were to say certain terms or ask you to think about different associations of Blackness, you could conjure on your own images, that don't look like this, that look far more offensive, that look, what is that definition? Hopeless, bad, evil, sad. And that kind of association, those images that I don't have to put on screen, that you might think, now I'm not saying that you believe in those images, right? But those stereotypes images that you can certainly access. This gets into a concept that D. Fox Harrell calls phantasms. And I'm going to explain more about that. So that was just a single image of, a corporeal physical Blackness as defined by a white European view. But I'm going to actually talk about whiteness. And I use whiteness because when I think about whiteness and when I use whiteness in my work, I think of it as a technology itself that is shaping our perceptions, our worldviews, the way that we treat each other, the way that we receive images, the way that we create images. And all of that can function even in the absence of white people. So really important to start thinking about these terms as, while they can relate to people and physical bodies, also just think of them as concepts and think about them as technologies that have a purpose and a function. Let's take a look at the virtual space, how Blackness is imposed, created, how images are blackened in virtual space. And I am situating this work on a very narrow subset of research, which is my research in 3D graphics. So this goes back to some of my early work when I first started this very seeds of the open source Afro Hair Library, the reason for the open source Afro Hair Library, which is, I'll talk about it of course later, but it's a free 3D database of Black hair textures and styles that was born from results like these. As a digital artist, I was working on virtual reality projects, making games and creating characters and looking for diversity of hair assets because there just weren't any in the software that I was using. And you can see it's pretty small, but in that search bar at the top right corner, you see me searching for Black hair and getting a variety of results that include animals, that include a lot of people that doesn't look like Black hair to me, right? Not the hair that grows out of my head and not the hair that, I see in my family. So this is one way I bring this up because it's not just the visual imagery, it's also the search term here, right? Just the sense that Black does not mean to the people who designed the site, we're looking at CG Trader right now, doesn't mean the same thing to them as it means to me. And so there's this process, even just in the vernacular, of trying to say, okay, how does whiteness see me, right? How can I find coily hair, kinky hair, afro-textured hair? What words do I use and what will the results be? So here are some of the results. By the way, a separate talk talks all about how I go through this process of like figuring out the exact key term. The brilliant term was Afro. I felt so amazing. It was like, oh my God, that's it. It both means Black as a people and it's a hairstyle. I got it. Surely this will be it. It wasn't it. You'll see. So I love sharing this image because this is actually an authentic Black hairstyle. She's got individuals, box braids. They look great. But she's spread eagle and it's her neck and her arms are bound by rope. And while I don't want to kink shame anyone, I'm not trying to be anti BDSM community in the space, but for one of my few access points for authentic Black hair being represented digitally, to also be paired with a naked bound Black body, the pickings are slim. Here's another image of Blackness, right? As determined not by Black people. This model is interesting. I don't think I have it on the slide, but this falls into so many stereotypes about the Black mammy. And it's a really offensive image on its own that harkens back to like Jim Crow era. But there's another model that made by the same artist. And the model for this is the same body. It's a monstrous slug. The only differences are, some fuller breast and basically an afro and these slippers here, right? But it was actually just a non-human monstrous slug creature. And so it's really interesting to think that monstrous feature could just be taken as a base model for a depiction of Blackness in virtual space. And then this is, if I haven't already made this clear, straight out of Jim Crow, like minstrels, mammies. And I find these images particularly striking. These are about the most offensive ones that I have, but I find them striking because I found them in 2019. And this kind of imagery, a lot of it has already been other media forms have distanced themselves, older media forms. Warner Brothers has these cartoons locked in a vault. Disney is like, oh, that was a bad look. So why is this being reintroduced in our most cutting edge media forms? And then again, to focus on hair and like looking at, there's things that may be more subtle. Like here I see a somewhat decent cornrows, there's issues with the scalp, but it's also presented on this kind of, I don't know, it seems almost like teenage. It's meant to be youthful, you know, nude body. What's that for? Why do we, is that necessary? I don't know. There feels like a kind of misogynist bent into these structures and platforms. And then here you see what is definitely not an afro. It may be a poor victim of electrocution, but not an afro. And yet it's even called afro hair, messy, right? We see these images, like look at the naming convention here. We have, on one hand, we have this person who doesn't appear to have any afro features, and then a head of pickup sticks, I don't know, a nest. And then this one on the right does not look like any Black person I have ever seen in my life, and it's called Black Male Afro Head Joe. And then here we have, you know, cartoon pregnant wife and husband in animal pelts with some, I don't even know what's happening there. There's this pose, you know, it's comedy, right? It's certainly not presented with either authenticity or dignity, or I would say even loving care culturally. From a technical perspective, if we look at this image on the right of Bubba with that sort of, you can't see it here, but that brickyard is meant to be like a prison yard, right? And the stereotypical Bubba, the prisoner, the inmate. When I look at that work, there's so much care that went into the actual construction of it, right? Like it's a technically solid work in terms of a 3D model. So there's this proficiency, technically speaking, but where's the cultural literacy or cultural sensitivity, right? So this is what I mean about these virtual images as constructed by whiteness. So I don't know if you see it, but I see a similarity between the images that we can conjure of a Blackness in the physical world and a Blackness in the virtual space. And for me, that similarity, even before I combine those terms, Black and virtual, Black already feels virtual. It shares those qualities, right? It's to be a person, to be virtually a person, right? Almost a person, but not quite. And this is part of, you know, US history where Black people are not fully citizens, not fully a human, right? And that was legislated into the fabric of this country. But even now, I'll just tell you, as a Black person operating in so many spaces, in academia, I feel often the same kind of idea that I am there. I'm a tenured professor and I'm the same, almost, I'm virtually the same as everyone else. I should have access. I'm almost there, but I still get these dehumanizations. I still experience that. So when I think about Black virtuality, I'm like, oh, well, this feels like a space, like the virtual feels like a space that I'm already in, this almost. And yet, you know, out of those images that we saw that are offensive, out of the experiences that I've had, the experiences of my people, come a different definition and different associations of Black, right? So you take a thing that is imposed upon you, and then you reclaim it, you adopt it, you make it yours, and then you have all kinds of beautiful work, beautiful art, constellations of ideas, perspectives, worldviews, ways of making, ways of being together that are incredible. Like, I love being Black and I love Blackness, and all of the things that I love about being Black, our adaptivity, our creativity, our generosity, the way that we care for our elders, the way that we don't want to dispose of people even when they're problematic, the way that we want to like call community in and be together. Those are all adaptations from something that's been imposed, but yet something beautiful comes of that. So the way I've been defining Black virtuality, right, is Black bodies, Black cultures, Black identities, and the sum of which being, you know, Black experiences or Black stories. I think about virtuality as how it's constructed and how it's consumed. across the board, whether that's by, with a Black worldview or a non-Black worldview. And since I'm talking about worldviews and perspectives, I actually want to bring up D. Fox Harrell's Phantasms. So D. Fox Harrell wrote an incredible book called Phantasmal Media, released in 2013. And so for the room, I want to kind of, I'll give a brief explanation of what a phantasm is. And I'm going to use an example from the book, which is this icon. And let me see, I want to see some faces here. Let's see, sorry, I'm doing some window resizing. So when I talk about phantasms, this image is an example of a phantasm, and we've already seen some others. So when we look at this image, what does this mean? And I don't know if people can put in the chat or somebody wants to mouth it on screen. I'm looking, I'm hanging out. Okay, we know what this means. I see some head nods. Okay, right? So I look at this and I say, oh, well, it's the sign for women. This must be a women's restroom, right? But what tells me that this is for women? Like, what tells me that's just right? Like, this is an abstract figure. There's this dress. And so I go, even though as a non-binary person, as a gender chaotic person who rarely wears dresses, who sees all kinds of people who identify as women who don't wear dresses, I look at this image and I know what it's supposed to mean, right? And so a phantasm, this is an example of a phantasm because it's an image that is imbued with meaning through the projection of a situated worldview. And situated means like this image for a women's restroom that exists in the US does not look the same if we were in South Asia. It may not look the same if we were in a completely different country or space, because that little triangle that represents dress, that also says women wear dresses, like that's not universal. So the abstraction changes, right? The minimal information that we need to identify something changes based on the communities that we're in, based on the understanding that we have formed, right? And this is, phantasms are recursive. So I wrote this thing, I'm like, meaning making image, making meaning, right? What I mean by that is when I see this dress, even though I don't personally subscribe to the idea that, first of all, I don't even know how to subscribe to the idea of women generally as a, like that's already a complication, right? But even that, women wear dresses. I don't believe that. That is so like totalizing and reductive. But when I see the image, I still know, oh, is that the bathroom that I want to use or not want to use, right? Because the image has been imbued with meaning because of my context. And now I imbue the image with meaning, and the images that I may create, right? I may perpetuate these kinds of images because I know the meanings that other people in my cultural context are associating with them, right? We could make this really simple. We could say stereotypes. We could say biases. But that's not how D. Fox Harrell approaches that. He approaches them as phantasms, and he talks about phantasms specifically because he's highlighting that these are not based in any kind of objective reality, right? When we think of a phantasm, it's like an apparition. Like it's there, but it's not there. It's there because we saw it, so it's there, but it's not real, right? I'm going to give you an example of another phantasm and why. I'm going to show you how phantasms work. So this is a phantasm. The one on the left tells us that this is meant to be a women's restroom. The one on the right, so this is an image from Claudia Rankine's Citizen, which was released in 2014. It is an incredible work. Definitely read it. It's beautiful and it's poignant. This image is of the tennis player who is opposing Serena Williams and at the championships. And she is like, just take in the image for a moment. Without me even saying it, what do you think she's doing? She is playing on a phantasm. She is playing on some people's idea of what a Black woman looks like, right? So on the left, we have woman, and on the right, we have Black woman, right? Oh, large bust, big butt, you know, sticking out, like that's what she's doing. And this is how, of course, it's racially offensive. That was her intention, was to cause harm. But why does it cause harm? Why does it work? Why don't we see this and go, what is she doing? Oh my God, how silly, how foolish. It's because this image has meaning because she's playing on what we know or what we've seen, what we believe, even if we don't share the view. Whether we look at this image and laugh in derisiveness or whether we go, oh, you know, like it hurts our heart, we're both sharing a phantasm, right? So I showed you that image of Viola Davis, and I said, it's not very offensive, right? Like it's not, there's nothing outwardly offensive about that. You know, people might say, oh, well, that's a esteemed photographer. What's wrong with that image? Nothing's wrong with that. It's like, okay, sure, it's fine. I want to show you a different image of Viola. Let's look at this one. And I love showing these images, like just taking it in, right? The halo, the crown, the gold, the simplicity, the smile, the skin. I mean, she's literally glowing. Now let's look at them together. These are two phantasms, right? These are the representations, the output of two different phantasms. On the left is something from a Black imaginary. This is how I see Viola Davis, right? And I love photography because photography is like, you know who your friends are based on how they take your picture. If they take your picture to post on Instagram and it's like a terrible, they got you this shot and you're looking crazy and they're just like, no, it's cute. You know that friend, they look cute, but you look a mess. That is not your friend. Your friend is the person who's like, you know, getting low to the ground and is like, okay, what? Well, no, wait, well, your hair, because they love you and they know how they see you. And the way that your image is produced comes out of that space. Their mental image of you needs to match. It doesn't matter if you do look a mess and your hair is a mess, and their mental image, they see you as stunning and glorious and beautiful, and therefore the images they take of you can reflect that. So that's why I share these two images. Okay, so as we know, terms have more than one definition. So I start with how, like, and I gave this talk a year ago, like not this talk, but I started to formalize these thoughts a year ago. And I was like, well, I just need to define what Black virtuality is. But that's not enough, right? This is a possibility of Black virtuality, is that it can be a way of approaching, perceiving, and doing things with software, with computational media, with digital media that's informed by Black lifeways and worldviews. And so I want to show you some examples of that. So I'm going to show you some work with the open source Afro Hair Library. And first, I'll just show you images. Since we're starting with images, let's look at imagery. You've seen what exists in the digital space for you know, Black characters or Blackness. Let me show you what happens when you get a group of Black artists together and you give them the time and the space and the money to author their own representations. Oh my God, I never can pronounce this. Aqua Bromello, that is not the pronunciation, but this is a take on the Scorpion King myth. And it's an Afrocentric take. And so you have this character who's got these beautiful, this beautiful bubble ponytail that ends in these like scorpion tips by an artist who goes by Evening Cicada that worked with us in the first open source Afro Hair Library Fellowship in like 2021. Here's another image of Blackness and Black hair. And of course, we're focused on hair, but I should mention that all of our characters, I say characters because that's what they are. And I'll talk more about that. We have, now, how many folks in the room play games? I assume it's a few, maybe 1, 2, 3. If you know anything about games and hair and Black hair, there's usually like 3 hairstyles. We got the messed up cornrows, sometimes with like shaved entire gaps of hair missing. We got the afro that comes in raggedy and comically sized disco afro. The 70s was 50 years ago. I know that's hard to accept, but there are other kinds of afros. and then locs. And the locs are always the same locs. They're like, except for in the last couple of years, it's been like one example of like, okay, cool. The ends were still weird, but I'm gonna give that a pass. Locs just unshaped. This is locs. We have an entire series just dedicated to locs, right? Not unstyled, not messy, beautiful, gorgeous. And something that I do at the Open Source Afro Hair Library, we're not just creating images to change that phantasm, right? Change that, imbue that association with something that comes from a Black place. But also kind of changing the relationship, that's another piece. So in those marketplaces, you know, that first image that I showed you there were just like these like hair, like a cap, like you just stick it on, like a bunch of wigs separated from a person or thrown onto some weird, you know, base model with no coloring, no love given. Something that I think about when I think about how Blackness exists in the virtual space and a distinction between the virtual and corporeal is, remember when I was talking about Black identities, Black bodies, and then, you know, Black culture? In the physical space, I have all of those together in one person. It's just, it's me, I'm here. But when we move into these virtual spaces, these mediated spaces, then we see this separation. We see this fragmentation. And when creating the library and working with artists, it was very important to me that it was guided by the sense of what I'm saying is a Black intact. So no, I'm not going to sell like, well, we don't sell anything, but we're not going to just have like other marketplaces where we have a collection of Black hands and Black feet. You know, you can just do that. You can go online and just buy virtual 3D Black hands and Black feet. It's super creepy and weird, right? We want to always show a full person, right? So here you have it. And you can see the love and care that goes into the hair also goes into Black people, the representation of a Black body. Here's some really cool sci-fi work from H.G. Harris, one of the artists that we've been working with the longest, about three and a half years now. HD is looking at hair as Black hair as a form of technology. Like even, you know, I can explain all of these things, but just looking at it, you can see the detail. You can see the difference. So this is one manifestation of Black virtuality, right? The construction of Black bodies in this space. And can I share this tab? Okay, I'm going to share this really quick. So I'm going to show you briefly the Open Source Afro Hair Library, our website, which we have a bunch of new things launching in the next month. So I don't get a lot of sleep these days, but let's take a look at the website. The way that this is structured, the warmth of the colors, there's a reason why it's not meant to look like a marketplace, because we don't want to buy and sell Black bodies like that. There's a logic behind this, where there's an approach to this. Hopefully there's a familiarity and a hominess in the way that we do things and present things. The way that we hype our people. Our model page is going live next week, fingers crossed. And so an important practice that the artists are always present. The artist's voice is there. You know, we wanna share our people. We wanna hype them. We wanna talk about the artists. We don't just want sort of like the product of their work. That's a little bit different than, it's actually very different than what you see when you go to other kinds of asset spaces and databases. Oh, okay. So culturally informed, sensitive, thoughtful, all shades of Black. With the library, there's one thing I'll touch on before I move on to this, because it's not visible yet. So we've spent a lot of time on the actual design of how you navigate the library itself. And this is thinking through some of Sophia Noble's work, if people are familiar with algorithms of oppression, where she talked about research she was doing using Google search, and basically how that search, it's a populist algorithm. The way that Google works, you could, at the time that she was doing this research, they've made some changes as a result. But if you were to type in Black girls, you wouldn't see images of children playing, for example. You would see pornographic images. And this was the same if you typed in Asian girls. It was the same if you typed in Latina girls, right? You'd see pornographic images, even though the term girl is explicitly meant to be a child, right? So that tells you a lot about, the way that we view and infantilize and sexualize women of color. And you type in white girls and you would just see what you would expect, what you should be able to expect, right? Of frolicking children. And so thinking through a populist search algorithm, I think about that, again, that recursive relationship between what we're seeking, the meaning, the images that we see, and then how that gets sort of re-entrenched. And so with OSOL, we don't actually have a search bar, because I don't want people to go to the library and look for and find what they're looking for, because maybe what they're looking for is racist. I have to assume that by default. I live in a racist context. So instead, we have a tagging system. So you're presented with these images of Blackness that maybe you didn't imagine. They weren't what you were looking for because you couldn't even conceive of them. And then we have a tagging system that goes based on like hair texture and hairstyles. So you either know the language of Black hair, or by using the library, you're learning it, right? So it's a very different approach as opposed to the more capitalist, we want the user to get exactly what they're looking for so they can buy our stuff. You're not buying anything. I don't care if you find what you're looking for. I want our Blackness to be imposed upon the viewer, right? So that's my work in open source Afro Hair Library, which I'm thinking and talking about all the time now. But I do want to share some of the work, and I'll do this briefly so we have time for questions. A game I made in 2020, which was Yay or Nay. And so Yay or Nay, for anybody who's played Guess Who, hopefully you have, childhood game, childhood fave of mine. It's full of binary identities. So it's a game of deduction. You get like a card that's like, oh, this is the person. And it's a two-player game, so you're trying to guess. Like, I'm trying to guess who you have, you're trying to guess who's on my hidden card. And we have this board, this row of faces. And it's really fun because there's a board and you flip it down and it's all clacky, it's all loud. It's like, love that, right? And so you're asking yes or no questions. You're saying, oh, okay, is your person wearing a hat? No. So now I got to close all the people who have hats. Does your person have blue eyes? No. Okay, let me get rid of that. So in this game, you don't ask yes or no questions, you ask yay or nay questions, because all of the characters are Black men, Black cultural icons, celebrities, and half of them are Kanye West. And so it's exploring, it's doing a few things, right? It's looking at a very surface level, it's looking at the way that we describe Blackness, our relationship to Blackness when you're not a minority, you're not in a minority context, right? Well, you can't say the Black guy because they're all Black and they're all Black men. So now what language do you have to use? You have to pay closer attention, right? Because when I'm in community, I'm like describing someone and I'm like, oh no, the person with the fade, the person with the Caesar cut, the person with the waves, the person with this. I'm using all of these other identifiers, right? That, if you're in Black community, then you have an advantage in this game because you're familiar already. You're at home, and if you're not, you may have to look for other language because you can no longer rely on that more dominant worldview, right? And I touched on this before, but the idea of a problematic fave, the idea that when you come from a marginalized community and you only have so many icons, that you have to use a lot more discretion between throwing people away. Yeah, which is a whole complex topic, but yeah, something to think about. And in the game, you can see, well, actually, I'll show you. In the game, you have the cards and you can just play straight through, but every card actually has, if you right click, there's like 4 or 5, there's a bunch of variations, like commentary, kind of Twitter style commentary on like who these people are and what they've given or taken to from the community. And this is my favorite because it's showing a point of Kanye, like why Kanye? Why not just throw him away? Why make a game about this person who's wearing MAGA hats and like has said, Harriet Tubman didn't free the slaves, But this is why. And I'll read this. It says, when I say I miss the old Kanye, I mean this Kanye in particular. What kind of society transforms a young man whose voice once trembled at injustice into an egotistical narcissist? And for those who aren't familiar, the title of this card is George Bush Doesn't Care About Black People, and it references during a live stream, a fundraising event by the Red Cross during Hurricane Katrina. Kanye West went off script. He was very young, very early in his career, and was like, deadpan, George Bush doesn't care about Black people. And talked about how the president was going to, check on all kind of other things instead of helping the people. And it was really amazing, hilarious, but also amazing and powerful. Okay, so the last piece that I'll talk about very briefly, because you can play it yourself. So it's fairlyintelligent.tech is the title of the work. It's also where you can go find the work. This is a speculative algorithm that exaggerates coded biases by taking the form of a kind of game questionnaire. The premise is that it talks about algorithmic bias and how all of these automated systems are having impacts on our lives, like real impacts. So an automated decision makers. So an example of an automated decision maker might be you are applying for something online and it says, oh, well, we want to check your credit. And it checks your credit and it says, oh, it denies you. It could be that it looks at your zip code, right? And it says, okay, the price because of your zip code, which you didn't ever say, right? It's just getting this data from your browser. Now the price is $10 higher than if you were in this other zip code. Or okay, we're gonna share particular kinds of advertisements with you because we've identified your demographic as being low resourced and maybe hopeless. These are real things, like actually hopeless. And so you seem like a good target for oh, and you've been depressed. So you seem like a good target for wanting to change your life through a for-profit college that's going to be no cost to you, but automatically take your student loans and grants and then give you, maybe not even give you, but present a degree that's worthless or unaccredited and get you in debt. So those kinds of things. So this algorithm talks about that and it says, well, what about having an algorithm for the people, by the people? And you user can actually change the algorithm so that we're more fair and just. Because there are all these calls to be like by tech companies usually that are like, well, the solution to our shitty practices is actually just have more of your data. We need more diverse data. We need like an inclusive mass surveillance. Like that's the solution. And so the algorithm sort of presents that tech liberalism and it says before you can change the system, you just have to go through this simple screening because we don't want racist up in here. And so you go through the screening, and the screening, of course, is itself the experience. And I really recommend you play it because you can get your very own readout that tells you two things. One, it'll tell you who you are, why you were locked out of the system, give you a detailed reading. And then it'll also give you some of the coded lines that you don't get to see in most programs that say, oh, you answered this way, and so we made a determination about who you were. And this is the box that it checked. And so those are some of my ways of, I guess, asserting myself into Black virtuality and saying okay, how can I move away from this neutral default? How can I move away from this, it's not neutral, but a worldview that's presented as neutral or a worldview that is presented as dominant? And how can I insert my own perspectives? How can I'm not just in the work that I make, but in the process of making, who I make work with, yeah, general attitudes. So I want to pause there because, yeah, time, and see what we think.
Thank you so much, AM. There's a virtual round of applause happening in the chat right now, and an actual one in the room right now as well. So we only have a couple minutes left, but maybe we do have time for one question. If there's somebody out there in the virtual or in the physical space that would like to ask a question of AM, I think we have time for just one. Are there any questions that folks are eager to hear about? I hate to do this, but since I don't see anybody volunteering immediately, I'm going to go ahead and ask the one question then. So, AM, once again, thank you so much for the talk. It was really great to hear about more about your work and sort of the theoretical and experiential impetus for this work. And I guess my question is, the Afro Hair Library is imagined as such a non-commercial, right, non-commodified space, especially the way that you describe it, right, non-searchable, etc. And yet, right, the biggest offenders when it comes to presenting these strange phantasms of Black hair are these AAA, right, game development studios that have hundreds of $1 million of budgets, so much that they're spending $10 million on boob physics, right, for women's breasts, and yet they're not spending $5,000, right, on good Black hair. How do you see the Afro Hair Library intervening in that space, and maybe ultimately impacting, right, the video games space at large, right, as a whole? Oh, you're muted right now.
Yes, thank you for that totally simple, easy question. It's complicated, right? Because we all live under capitalism or trying to survive within capitalism. So I actually just finished the first draft of a license, and there were 2 licenses that I was thinking about for the Afro Hair Library. And forgive me, I'm just really basic and I love puns. So I was like, there's the Black license for anti-capitalist software, which is Blacks. And then the other one is the Black open source software license, which is BOSS. And they really have kind of 2 antithetical, there's this like clash here. And I feel more comfortable playing fast and loose with open source than I do with anti-capitalism. And I tend to be jokey. So I've got the BOSS license now. And, the library, it's really important to me that the library itself is a space that is protected and that is nurtured, and that the way people interact with it is not to go find a resource, download it and dip, that is a space that people invest in. And the license is written very expressively. Like, that's part of the artwork for me, is like, how do you enforce something with an abolitionist worldview? Are you going to go and say, you can't do that? No, but setting an intention using the language of software, using a license, I think is really interesting. And of course, Evers Pipkin has done this with the anti-capitalist software license. So the space is important. And yet also, outside of that space, I see these links, like with the artist. There's a reason why we want the artist to be so foregrounded, because we want them to get those opportunities. We do want to diversify the space so that Black people are actually present in the culture that we create for, right? And I have so many examples. You're right, like games, I mean, Fortnite. Fortnite has the swipe it dance. And I love using this example because the swipe it dance is something they swiped, like they stole it and named it the stole it dance. They swiped it from, it's the Millie Rock, right? Like that you can't, you swipe it from a Black rapper, a Black artist, and then you call it that. And then you put it on a white avatar and it's goofy looking and doing the thing. So yes, games, and games aren't the only thing, but they are horrible with this. And so we do partner with companies. I do personally, I consult with companies and try to like, okay, say, here's what we do. But I think that those are sort of dual. I see them as separate. I see one as Black folks should be able to benefit from the knowledge that we do share. We should benefit from the fact that we are creating and pushing these technologies. For example, the artists at the open source Afro Hair Library, almost all of them are self-taught, which means they are teaching themselves how to utilize the technology, very similar to braiders, right? Like for people who don't know. So there was a whole court case around Black hairstylists who braid hair because they were braiding hair unlicensed. Cosmetology schools, beauty schools did not teach Black hair. They did not cover braiding at all. So it didn't make sense for these braiders to go get a formal education on something that wasn't going to teach them how to do something for their community. And I see that parallel with our artists. A lot of them don't go through formal training. And even if they do, they're still using software and they're being taught ways that don't, like this, the technology doesn't exist to create Black hair, to simulate it accurately. So our artists design their way out of a limited system. And yeah, I hope that some of them do, they teach, some of them work in the game industry, but I think like this is a space of Black community to platform Black folks, to highlight and amplify our accomplishments, to get paid. And also all of the artists are paid. That's another huge thing. Like an open source community needs people to support it and donate their time and their money and all these things. But I look at the library as sort of being this space of like, when you show up as a Black person, you're sharing your knowledge and you're getting resources and you're getting support, financial, social, all of that, and access and opportunities. And as a non-Black person, you're benefiting. And also, what are you showing? It's like coming to a party. Like that's actually in the license. Like think of it as like the library is cake. It was intended for Black people to give to the Black community, but everybody gets to enjoy it as long as you're showing up to celebrate, right? If you're showing up to party crash, that's a different story. If you're showing up to, and what do you do when you come to a party and eat cake? You don't show up empty-handed, right? You show up ready to amplify and celebrate and bring a gift and bring some knowledge and boost, right? So that's my answer for now. And yeah, I'm still doing this work, and part of the timeline has been, how do I make it open, and also how do I protect it? How do I make sure there are opportunities here and that we're able to impact industry, whether working with the industry, collaborating, but also dictating the terms of that so that we're not being diluted or owned by industry, so we can show up as ourselves. So that's my answer today. Ask me again next year.
Yeah, thanks. That's very, very clever to, to be able to set up a resource that gives those artists that platform and gives you and those artists the ability to, right, dictate those terms to the industry. So the industry can't just buy in the same way that independent developers do, but rather they have to go through you and those artists as the mediators of that. So that's great. That's great. We're sort of we're a little bit over the end of our time, so we should wrap up here. I want to thank everybody who came out online, and particularly folks at the Tag Lab in Concordia University, the Serious Play Lab at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, as well as the Digital Humanities folks at the University of Alberta. 3 of our watch parties that were going on. So in addition to the 7 folks in the GI space, in addition to the 25 folks online, we also had a handful of folks in each of those 3 satellite spaces that were tuning into us. So thank you all for coming out to this great talk, and thank you once again to AM Darke for sharing the sort of the conceptual and experiential background of the Afro Hair Library and your work on digital Black virtuality. Thank you so much.